Hello everybody and welcome to the Sovereign Village Project. I want to talk today about foraging in the garden. To me, foraging is not a fun hobby or something I do on the weekends, although it is both of those. But it is a real crucial part of my food supply, and it's a large portion of the food that we eat here. And I think as a culture we've forgotten how to forage. When we talk about foraging, we think of something that we have to be very careful of, and we don't want to hurt the natural environment. And of course that's true. We should be careful, we should be mindful and responsible and regenerative when we forage. But that does not mean that foraging can't be a massive part of our food supply sustainably. We can do it without really hurting the food supply for animals and without tapping out those crops that are growing abundantly and wildly all around us. And so when I started gardening in this space, which is our little kitchen garden off of the side of the A-frame property here, I sought to identify all of the edibles and to preserve as many of them as I could and work around them and garden around them. And then as I've continued to garden in this area and build the soil here, I continue to build those up and actually improve them. So it's actually kind of blurring the line between farming and foraging, which is a really great, fun way to do things. You can actually watch the wild species improve. For example, I've been saving dandelion seeds specifically. Actually, I'll go ahead and show you here. I've been saving dandelion seeds specifically from the dandelions that have the biggest greens. Most of the dandelions around here tend to grow really small leaves that are kind of underneath the grass level, and so they're really not good for salad greens. They're tasty and highly nutritious, but they just don't work very well. They don't produce a lot of food. And so what I've been doing is really seeking to save the seeds from the ones that do produce bigger leaves, because dandelions grow so abundantly and easy. You set them and you forget them. They come back year after year. They're an ultimate food source, especially when you look at their nutritional content and how you can use every part of the plant. So this one is very different than the others, if you see here. This guy's got big old, really nice leaves with a little bit of coloration in them that make them look really fun in a salad. And as you can see, that's about to flower and then go to seed. And so I will be saving all of the seeds from that dandelion, and I'll be planting that one over at the new property. So over time, my dandelions will get bigger and better suited for this environment and for my needs for eating. And similarly, we've got some chickweed over here growing in the pathway. And the chickweed grows abundantly. Chickweed is really tasty. It's got a really fun flavor to add to just about any kind of dish. And what's cool about this plant is it works really well as a pathway plant. So it's growing in between these pathways. It's hard to even tell that this is a pathway because it's so abundant, but here's one side of the garden, here's the other side of the garden. And because I use these redneck versions of raised beds just made out of logs, these logs break down and they're feeding these pathways. So I don't want to waste all that good soil in the pathway, although I'm compacting it and walking on it constantly. So I really encourage these plants to grow, and I do try to walk around them a little bit, but they can take a foot pretty well. I walk on them all the time, and their job, a lot of these jobs of these edible forage plants actually is to break up soil and keep it loose. So I'm gardening my pathways by foraging. I will take this chickweed all the time. I carefully harvest in patches so that I can leave some of it to go to seed so that it will continue to self-seed and propagate. Over here we have some plantain coming up, and it's looking really healthy. I did not plant that there. It's actually inside of the garden bed, and conveniently this bed is all greens. As you can see, we've got a lot of greens going to seed here. And since it's all greens, of course, I'm going to leave a natural green there. Plantain is delicious and, again, highly nutritious. And so it's grown way above the other plantains because it's just got that naturally good soil that I've been building for a long time. So it's got access to better soil than the other wild forage greens. And so all throughout my garden, I'm incorporating all of these forage edibles, and I'm propagating them, I'm encouraging them, I'm certainly not removing them. Why would I remove free food? I've got wild garlic growing everywhere, and wild garlic I'll often transplant from other areas of the yard over to here. In fact, I'll do that with plantain because over here we have a septic field. And since we haven't been at this house for very long, I don't really know what the previous occupants were eating or pooping out. I don't know what's in that septic field, what kind of chemicals, so I don't like to harvest my food directly out of there, but I will take a perennial plant, or I'll take a wild garlic or a plantain or even a dandelion, and I'll go ahead and plant it in the garden. I'll harvest it, give it to the chickens initially, and then let it regrow with the new nutrients and become an established plant that will come back year after year without the dangers of whatever is in the soil over in that septic area. So this garden area is just full of so many different foraged edibles, and every day when I come out and I gather my food for my meal, which happens every single meal we come out here and we gather our food, it's probably about half a handful of foraged foods, of wild foods, and then a handful of whatever I've actually planted and intended to grow. And when you start to, it's really easy to do this because once you learn to identify a plant, you've got it for the rest of your life. It's a little intimidating at first because it's hard to figure out what's what. But you just start with the really easy ones. We all know what a dandelion looks like. Wild garlic just looks like a big chive thing growing. Plantains are very easy to recognize, although there's multiple versions of plantain. Chickweed's really easy to identify. If you think of a few in the comments you'd like to add that are easy to look up, that are your favorite foraged foods, please do add them. Let's get a discussion going about this. I really believe you could actually probably feed yourself just by propagating forage foods, and probably be quite healthy doing it. I just grow things that I want to grow because they're fun, they're colorful, and I like a lot of variety in my diet. So there's really no line here. Here we have a tomato, here we have a wild plant, here we have kind of a lettuce, here we have another wild plant. They're just scattered throughout there, and there's really no delineation between them. So I encourage you to try this. It's a lot of fun, and it just makes it so easy, and it completely changes your health. When you start eating the food we are intended to eat, which is really, we're hunter-gatherers. We're supposed to walk through the woods, hunt and gather, and then kind of mildly propagate things. That's really all we need to do as a species to survive, and for this planet to survive. So everyone, I encourage you to learn foraging. It is the single best thing you can do for your survival, for your health, for your happiness. It's a great activity, and it's a good way to garden. One last thing, if you're looking at things that are doing really well, for example, plantain or dandelion or whatever, if something's doing really well in your yard and you can't stop it from growing, you should also seek to see what are the domesticated versions of that. Can I also plant those? You can plant purple plantains and all sorts of plantains that will, if plantain's doing well, those ones are also likely to do well. If I've got dandelion growing, I'll plant chicory. And in fact, I did that when I saw how abundant the dandelion was on this property. I went ahead and I planted chicory, and it grows incredibly. It's almost as tall as me now. This one's going to seed, and these have actually been here for 2 years. So for 2 years, that chicory has been feeding me, and it's a beautiful, it has a really beautiful leaf, kind of purple. Looks great in salads, and just like the dandelion, every part of it is edible, and it's related to the dandelion. And so by just following nature and observing what was doing well in the wild foods, I've made an abundant perennial food source that I just don't even have to manage. I haven't planted any plantain this year, but I have a whole bed of it, and it just keeps feeding me. I just keep taking it from it, and I just add a little bit to the soil, and it's pretty much eternal. All right, so everyone, I hope you take this to heart and have some fun foraging. Happy foraging and happy homesteading.